How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Next Generation. This movie came out initially in 1995 and was at first known as The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but in 1997, after the movie stars got bigger, this was re-released and retitled The Next Generation. This movie is written and directed by Kim Henkel, who is one of the writers from the Part 1, so cool to see a returning writer. And this movie stars Renee Zellweger, Matthew McConaughey, and Robert Jacks as the new Leatherface. And this is one of those movies, it's not the biggest and most well-known sequel, so it's always strange when you come across it for the first time. I know the first time I became aware of this movie, I saw it and said, wait, what? Because at first, The Next Generation, that's a Star Trek title in a chainsaw movie. That's weird enough on its own. But then you see Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey in an unknown chainsaw sequel. That's just crazy, you know? And you have to keep in mind that this is before either of them were super big and famous, and they both are Texas actors. So yeah, they were famous appearance by two major celebrities in one movie. That's pretty nuts. Now, this movie, as you can kind of tell just from that, it's quite a bit of an odd duck. It's a really weird little slasher movie, and it's been a couple years since I watched it, so I rewatched it again for this review, and having done a new rewatch, it's kind of weird to say this movie is both better and worse than I remember it being, if that's even possible. If you want a good, cheesy, insane slasher movie, this is definitely there for you, but there is a whole ton of flaws in it as well. And overall, I do have to say I enjoy this movie primarily for Matthew McConaughey here, and there is some moments that they really do get right, but yeah, there is a ton wrong with this movie. But I guess let's start off with the pros. Matthew McConaughey's character, right off the bat in the setup, he's this guy with a big tow truck, and when he's driving around at night, it's got all these lights on it. A big, scary vehicle. And he's also got a robotic leg brace that he controls with a TV remote. And if all that wasn't enough, he's working for some secret government agency, something like the Illuminati, which is a big out-of-left-field turn into a conspiracy movie? That's nuts. So he has a whole bunch of setup that without any more work would still make him a very strange and interesting character. But then, on top of all that, he's Matthew McConaughey, and he is big and insane and full of energy in this movie. He'll at several times just go, woo, you know, really big, really loud. He is just insane to watch, you know, and it's really hard to describe, and I'd say his performance is enough to warrant watching the movie. And it really is just very, very weird and over the top. And yes, he does say, all right, in this movie, which is great that they got that trope down early on. And that's when the movie's at its best. This movie's at its best when it's just being pure insanity and making no sense and just going big, right? You know, that's when it's at its best. You know, there's a really good scene where they're chasing around on the rooftops, and I found that to be pretty fun. And when the movie's fun, it's fun. But it does have some cons. In particular, the kills. I think the kills is probably one of the biggest things. Not terribly many people die here, and when they do die, it's generally kind of forgettable. There's a few people that just get hammer whacks to the head. There's one person who their head gets squashed under a boot, but you don't see it. It's off camera. They didn't do the courtesy of building a mannequin head, filling it full of red goo and squishing it. That's what you're supposed to do. You're a slasher movie. Don't keep the kills off camera. The boot one's off camera. There's one with the truck that's shot from a distance, so essentially off camera. And really, the best kill is Matthew McConaughey's first one, because you don't really know he's going to do it, and then it happens, and he's like, haha, we're in a slasher movie. But outside of that, the kills are just kind of weak in this movie, you know? So that's a big problem. The kills, but also the characters. Renee Zellweger is good. She's a good final girl. Matthew McConaughey already said he's one of the better Texas Chainsaw family members. And then you have Leatherface, and I do like they actually got Leatherface right in here. His mask is his personality. He doesn't really have a good sense of self, and this movie, more than a lot of other ones, emphasizes the fact that he plays a character whenever he puts on someone's face. And there's actually a scene later on in the movie where Leatherface is about to do something, and Renee Zellweger points at him and says, "No, you sit down." And he actually obeys because Leatherface, in his heart, he doesn't really want to be a bad guy. He's just doing what his family tells him, and he respects authority. And that really doesn't come up in too many other movies. But if you ever find yourself fighting Leatherface, remember, he responds to authority. So they really did get the character right in this movie, and I really do like that. But the other characters, outside of those three, that's where the problem lies. You get lots of characters that are kind of forgettable. W.E., one of the other new Sawyer family members, he quotes people. That's his stick, he just does quotes. Okay, whatever. Renee Zellweger's boyfriend in this movie, super forgettable. So yeah, there's some forgettable characters, and then there's some obnoxious characters. You know, some, like, Matthew McConaughey does big over-the-top obnoxious well, but some of the other characters, like Renee Zellweger's friends, there's a guy who's kind of, you know, the jock character, and he's just insufferable. At one point, he walks into the house, he's locked one of the bad guys out, and he just walks around like he owns the place. And also, he lies to women for sex, so yeah, he's a pretty big scumbag and not a great character. And then the jock's girlfriend is just kind of this weird diva character, and then oddly enough, there's also a diva character in the family as well, so it's kind of a repeat, and they don't really draw parallels between these two. So yeah, the side characters are either bland or obnoxious, so not the best. And there's also just several weird moments in this movie, you know? Leatherface is coming after Renee Zellweger, and the door is clearly pre-cut. So when he chainsaws into it, he's really just knocking the pieces out. And, you know, there's like a case of an obvious body double. There's that. There's Grandpa is back, which doesn't really make much sense because he died in the last one. He got shot in the face and sand came out. But here he's just back. He shows up for the dinner scene, and then he just leaves for no reason. So he's there, and then he just walks away, never to be seen or heard from again. Also, the girl, why she's kidnapped one of the main characters and got her locked in the trunk, stops to get pizza first at a drive-in pizza place for some reason. And then shortly after that scene, she attacks someone with a stick, and it's like the weakest hit ever. And there's a whole bunch of parts in this movie that just are really weird and just don't quite add up. And there's also a lot of Easter eggs to the first movie that are just really lackluster. You know, someone gets put on a hook because that happened in the first one. Someone gets put in a freezer because that happened in the first one. A character says, "Look what your brother did to the door," because that happened in the first one. But when Drayden said that line in the first one, it was so big and enthusiastic and powerful, and here the guy just holds up the door and says it. And also, like, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre camera flash sound effect is for prom photos. So yeah, it's really strange just how unenthusiastic these Easter eggs are to the first one. And I think a large part of this mess can be attributed to what the director was actually trying to do. You see, since the first Chainsaw Massacre, he thought slashers had gotten weak and kind of tame, and he wanted to do sort of a parody. But yeah, it didn't quite work. Actually, this is 1995. This is a year before Scream would come out, so about the same time, and you could go on for forever talking about why Scream worked and Next Generation didn't, and I think a large part of that is Scream was clear it was a parody, and this one just didn't have that statement of intent, so we don't get that you're joking about weird slasher movies. We think you're just a weird bad slasher movie. And also, the idea of doing a funny, self-referential parody of Texas Chainsaw Massacre? He knows Tobe Hooper already did that, right? Like, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 was the parody comedy entry. Why are you doing it again thinking you're being original? That kind of bugs me, you know? So overall, he had a message, but he was not very clear on it, and yeah, it just... And also, you can't expect me to believe all of that was intentional, right? I can't believe every goofy moment in this film was on purpose, even if you say so. But anyway, I know I've just really harped on the movie for a long time, and I do want to say this does have a ton of flaws. Overall, though, I did like it for its goofiness. I loved Matthew McConaughey's performance, and it's worth checking out just for that alone. And the movie does some stuff right. It's just really, you know, other than the main three, lackluster characters, lackluster kills, and a message that gets muddy and confused and lost along the way, but still a good Matthew McConaughey performance. So I don't hate this movie, I just think it has major flaws, but what I do like from it, you know? Anyway, let's analyze the plot a little bit in more detail. I'm not going to be doing any major spoilers, but I do want to analyze the plot, so let's go ahead and dive in. So like the other movies, this one does have a text crawl at the beginning, and the text crawl talks about the first movie, but also makes a reference to the sequels. There's some people that go, oh, this movie's a reboot, but the text crawl does reference parts 2 and 3. It calls them, I think it was something like smaller, yet apparently related, because the director's trying to dish on parts 2 and 3. And really, I mean, I get 3's forgettable, but trying to make fun of part 2 and calling it smaller, if anything, you can't call part 2 smaller. That was big and crazy, but whatever. It opens up insulting 2 and 3, and you really can't insult part 2. Part 2 is a hidden gem. But anyway, moving on. We open up with Prom Night, not the Jamie Lee Curtis vehicle, Prom Night in a small Texas high school, and one of the girls sees her boyfriend kissing another girl, and she gets mad and hops into her car and starts to drive away. Her boyfriend follows her, gets in the car as well, and then Renee Zellweger and her boyfriend pop up in the back seat like they're Spritle and Chimp Chimp from Speed Racer or something. So they pop up, and the girl is upset with her boyfriend. The boyfriend's trying to calm her down, and she just starts driving erratically into the countryside. They take a suspicious detour, they get super lost, and then another car out of nowhere crashes into them, and now they have to go find help. So yeah, a weird way to get into a chainsaw movie. Your lead character just happened to be in the back seat of a car that just happened to speed randomly into the countryside, and just happened to get lost, and just happened to get in a car wreck. It's super weird. It's just the writers throwing these characters into the movie with little rhyme or reason. But then they decide to go get help. And yeah, a large part of the third act is randomly wandering around on these back roads and just being lost. So yeah, the first third of this movie is random roads. So yeah, you get Renee Zellweger and the jock and his girlfriend. They leave Renee Zellweger's boyfriend with the driver of the car that hit them, who's hurt, because Renee Zellweger's boyfriend is the least interesting character, so they just leave him behind. And the three eventually do find a small trailer. The small trailer is actually a real estate office, and inside is the character Darla, who, when they tell her what happens, she calls Vilmer, that's Matthew McConaughey's character, she calls Vilmer, who drives a tow truck, and she says, I called him, and he'll get your car out of there, and they leave because they found help. Now, a few things with this scene. The trope of the person that's secretly in on it, it has been used a lot. It's expected in a chainsaw movie. But that being said, a real estate agent that's secretly in on that? Like, you don't just happen to wander into a real estate office the same way you would happen to wander into a gas station. It's super weird that it's the real estate agent that's secretly in on it. Also, she says, I'll call the wrecker. I'll call the tow truck. Okay, you got the cars out of there, but you did leave because the guy in the other car was dying, right? You don't say, cool, but also call an ambulance? So yeah, forget the guy that's almost dying. Who cares about him? So eventually McConaughey does get to the other two first, and Renee Zellweger does encounter McConaughey, and you do get some good scenes with McConaughey, especially talking to the other two characters and really poking and prodding at them. Renee Zellweger's other two friends do get to the house. They take a different turn. They get to the house first and have the initial chase sequences. And again, like I said, a lot of stuff that we have seen in the first movie. And yeah, when the chase sequences work well, they work well. But that's more like when Renee Zellweger gets there and she does the big rooftop chase sequence and is like climbing around on the TV antenna. That one's good, but then there are just other kind of rambly where she like runs into the other room for a minute and gets pulled back. It's like, okay. So, yeah, McConaughey's there, and they of course do the dinner scene, and you of course find out about the Illuminati that he works for. It's not technically the Illuminati, that's just what everyone calls it. It's this vague agency that's inspiring fear in people, and you do get bits where they talk kind of about conspiracy stuff, and you're not really sure what all's real or what all's in Vilmer's head, and that is an interesting and new element, and I overall did like it just because, you know, it's something that's new and different, and it's an interesting idea that these acts of horror would be secretly orchestrated. So yeah, it kind of comes out of left field, but it is something different. And it's also one of the few parts of the metaphor that actually works, you know? You know, I said the movie was a metaphor about how slashers had gotten weaker, and this group, the secret agency, it's like the studio demanding another Chainsaw sequel. This agency going, we need another act of horror that's as scary as the first Chainsaw incident. So I did get that, you know. So there are elements from that I do like. And overall, I have to say, when this movie's good, it's good. When it's got the manic energy, especially like the first one did have some manic energy, and not all the sequels get that, and that is really important, having the energy like in the first one, and when it's pushed to this big crazy extreme, I like that, you know. So the Illuminati plot was different and interesting. The energy was good. They understood the character of Leatherface, and Renee Zellweger is a good final girl. And yeah, it's worth watching for McConaughey alone, just that over-the-top insanity he brings. But outside of that, the kills are kind of weak, sadly, and you think the kills would be insane in a movie like this, but they're not really great. So yeah, the kills are kind of weak. The characters outside of the main three are either boring and forgettable or just over the top and in your face. And then the message of this movie definitely gets lost, where if you had told me, oh, this movie is a parody of slasher movies, I wouldn't have got that unless you told me, because it just seems like a cheesy slasher movie. It doesn't seem like a parody of a cheesy slasher movie. So, yeah, there's a ton of faults with this. It's definitely not the worst movie in this franchise. There are movies that I think are worse, and when it works, it works. It just definitely doesn't work all the time. But if you want a cheesy slasher, this is a good example of a cheesy slasher. But anyway, I think I've talked for quite a bit about this movie. So to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist on the bottom. This should be my Texas Chainsaw Massacre playlist. I've talked about, I think, 6 of the 9 movies, and that includes the new Netflix one. I talked about that as well. So if you want to see me talk about more Chainsaw, you can find that in that playlist, as well as a physical media collection. So yeah, more Chainsaw in this playlist down here. So anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Relevant playlist on the bottom. Have a good day now.